Okay, Frank, I think the news today, what's absolutely stands out in the news is the problem of phone hacking and Rupert Murdoch and News Corporation and so on, and the way it's affecting parliamentary business in England and threatening to cause trouble in this country and spread elsewhere as well.
I agree.
And it's very interesting to think about whether this is something that couldn't have happened before. When presumably the cell phones have had their present extent of usage among all sections of the population for barely 10 years. And it took a while for people to learn how to hack into them, I think, or for them to be used in such a way that they were worth hacking into. And now, all of a sudden, people who want new sorts of information have tremendous opportunities that we wouldn't have dreamt of before. And it opens up a lot of interesting possibilities about the way the spread of information is going to continue in the future.
It's very interesting, actually, because only maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when there was that first initial burst of global discussion about the proliferation of spam email, many of those spamming email origin points were traced back to servers in Central Asia and the former Soviet republics. And I remember reading that. In my mind, I would have these images of Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan and Mongolia with these concrete buildings with server farms there, and thinking, my God, that's where all this stuff is coming from. And then the next wave was the discovery of young people, like barely teenagers in many instances, living behind the former Iron Curtain, who in fact were being arrested with the aid of American FBI help for excessive spamming or beginning to hack into some secure networks. So this next step of breaking into cell phone networks of very well-known people and even not so well-known people by, in fact, a news organization is almost like a logical next step, it seems.
It would be interesting if we could bring the ghost of Beaverbrook into this discussion in some way.
Yes, one of the original newspaper titans, yes.
The Rupert Murdoch is probably unique in the newspaper business today, largely, I think, to the dismay of many of the other people on his board. He's holding on to newspapers because he somehow identifies with newsprint, and that's what's got him into all this trouble. And it has exposed, it's one of the first examples, I think, of somebody who is definitely overprivileged in modern global society, being exposed by having apparently infringed on the rights of people who are very underprivileged. And it's all out there in the public arena. And it's probably the first example of this type, of that sort of juxtaposition.
I agree, and I think if history is any guide, even over the past year or so, there's going to be a retaliatory attack against News Corp. If we look at some of the movements that occurred, for example, in response to people who were no longer accepting credit card transfers for contributions to WikiLeaks, such as PayPal, and I believe one of the other major credit card companies, I'm not sure if it was MasterCard or Visa, they were attacked by that group Anonymous. For slowing down the proliferation of truth coming from the WikiLeaks contribution stream. So I guess what's happening now is, because of globalization and these social media networks, you have regular people who can watch the news and talk to another regular person or two who might have some expertise in computer coding or something in the computer languages, and then begin to coordinate a pinpoint attack that's essentially going to cost that company money, if not great embarrassment.
The whole information business is changing, and this, I think, is going to turn out to have been a landmark in a much longer process of change in which, I mean, up until very recently, there were a few businesses that controlled an enormous amount of information flow, and most people were just consumers or receivers. And it's gradually been becoming much more interactive, so that even prestigious newspapers like The Guardian get a lot of their clientele addicted to them simply by giving them the opportunity to interact with the newspaper. I think that's true of a lot of other newspapers as well now, and certainly the BBC is doing it. So the BBC World Service is now an interactive service. It's not just the BBC giving information, it's people interacting with the BBC about discussion issues.
Well, for 6 hours of the BBC's day, their programming is titled World Have Your Say.
Yeah.
And they don't make any bones about it. It's very clear that this is their target group. They want people to interact with them. And preposterously, and I'm obviously not in favor of it by what I'm saying, you can be driving in your car listening to digitally subscribed Sirius radio that you're paying for, and you're listening to the BBC interview some housewife somewhere in Central America. I mean, not that I have anything housewives in Central America, but I'm like, where's the news? I'm not particularly interested in her view of the news.
Well, I've been wondering where the news is when I've had NPR on in the car for a long time. But,
I'm sure.
But it really does change the whole information business. It's no longer special topics being communicated by special people to a large general audience which is just passive. The whole thing is not only more interactive but much more flexible and not predetermined.
What are the ramifications for an accelerating speed and the proliferation of globalization as a result of this, do you think?
The speed of globalization, I think, is increasing all the time, but the aspect of it that fascinates me is what I have now got used to calling informalization. And somebody actually has written a book by a Dutchman by the name of Voters has written a book called Informalization a few years ago, which means that the differentiation of status that was obvious to people in the public arena has been fading gradually. And even now, when it's obvious that people have different statuses, just if only because some of them, because they have different amounts of money, and in some cases vastly different amounts of money. Nevertheless, the interaction between people in these different statuses has become much more informal. So I don't know how that person got in to be able to throw a custard pie at Murdoch the other day, which his wife fielded very efficiently for him. But that in itself is a wonderful example of the way that privilege no longer counts for anything.
Well, I think that informalization is quite correct. If you look at these people who have hundreds and hundreds of friends on their Facebook accounts, or people who are followers on Twitter, many people follow hundreds of people on Twitter, celebrities. So you have people who have relationships with people over the internet, in which they communicate with them on email or in mass email, broadside emails. Or they only see photos or video images of them on the internet, and they're counted as, quote unquote, their friends. They're people that they text long into the night. They're people that they keep abreast of their daily activities by their posting. So translating that into a celebrity or a world leader or a movie star or something is a very, very small step. All of a sudden, a Tom Cruise or a Nicolas Sarkozy or a Carla Bruni become almost as close or as remote as a 20-year-old or an 18-year-old friend on Facebook. So you're right, there is a great leavening going on here.
And truth really is difficult to find.
Yes.
Difficult to be sure of. In any situation, and journalists can't wait to verify their information before they publish it. Anything you want to find out about, if you want to be sure of your facts, or as sure as you possibly can be, you've got to find several different sources that relate to the same information. So the way everybody thinks about information, the way information works generally, is changing completely, not only because of the incredible expansion of the field of information, but also because you can't differentiate anymore among the people who are providing it.
I noticed yesterday that in the morning the Taliban was racing around disputing rumors that apparently subsequently were determined to have been the result of a hack of their own systems. That
Mullah Muhammad Omar has died.
Correct.
And I wonder whether, I think there's probably more still to be learned about that, whether it was hacking, and whether who did the hacking, whether it was people in a different camp out there, or people over here.
Well, that leads to another observation, not to get too far off the track. I know we're limited on time, but we, meaning me at least, and in my conversations with you, we talk about semi-loosely organized groups of people who are involved in hacking, whether it's this group Anonymous or whomever. But there has to be a realization by any thinking person that the American government and the British government and other big Western powers, if not the Chinese as well, who we know are involved in this, have government-sponsored initiatives ready to go at the start of a combat situation where you're going to end up with digital warfare. I mean, the government of this country, from time to time, we see glimpses of this in the paper, is spending billions and billions of dollars getting ready for exactly this eventuality where they're going to electronically cripple the infrastructure of any potential enemy.
There's so many possibilities that could evolve out of the current situation, partly because it's anyway very volatile. It's very easy for things to happen suddenly because of a focus of attention that we weren't expecting. And it's also possible for individuals to start a movement to focus attention in a way that other people aren't ready for. I think that what's happening so far is the adoption of technologies which everybody's ready for and is happy to adopt. The society, social relations generally have got to the point where everybody's eager to do this sort of thing. And so the technology gets adopted and they do it. But at some point it's very likely, possible at any rate, that the technology will take off independently of the people who are using it, and new things will be possible. It'll be possible, for example, to watch the way public opinion changes throughout the world, so that in the same way that here in an election, if the polling booths close sooner on the East Coast than they've closed on the West Coast, that affects the way people might, or we're sometimes afraid it might affect the way people vote on the West Coast. But if it were possible for people to see how everybody else is voting all the way through the day, and that may very well become possible, that's going to change the way elections work.
Right.
So the way public opinion changes from the beginning of an election campaign to the end of an election campaign, it's going to be impossible to prevent that from continuing to happen through to the end of the closing of the polling booths.
There's another potential here, unfortunately, that I think needs to be mentioned. If you go back to the advent of radio, back in the 1920s, and then you look and see what, for example, the fascist regimes did with radio, Joseph Goebbels in particular, who was a master of its use in propaganda. I'm just wondering if 30, 50, 60 years from now, people are going to be reading history about this era, saying, boy, they just didn't have any idea as to the harmful uses that could be gained or used of this new technology by people with really malevolent intentions.
Yeah, I think because everything is becoming relative. There are no absolutes anymore. There's too many parties in any interaction. I think what we're watching actually is the final end of the great chain of being. that everybody knew their position in society and what they should do in relation to everybody else, and gradually it's becoming obvious that nobody has any position in society and everybody has equal capability of spreading information, owning information, generating information. I think we've come to the end of our time for today.
We have, and this was a particularly interesting one. We should carry on this one. All right, thank you for your time, Professor Spooner.